Everyone has a list of the hardest bosses. Everyone argues about difficulty. That's not what this video is about. This is about iconic. Boss fights that didn't just test your skill, but stayed in your head long after the credits rolled. The ones you remember without looking them up. The ones that define Dark Souls. And before we start, no, the Nameless King didn't make this list. Not because he isn't great, but because iconic is more than just difficulty. This isn't a popularity contest, and it's not about how many times you died. This is our top 5 most iconic boss fights across the Dark Souls trilogy. Let's start with number 5. Great Grey Wolf, Sif. This wolf is not remembered because the fight is hard. He's remembered because it feels wrong. You don't walk into this arena expecting a tragedy, but that's exactly what you get. A loyal wolf, guarding a grave. Not out of hatred, not out of madness, but out of duty. As the fight goes on, Sif starts to limp, and in that moment, the game stops being about winning. You're not proving strength anymore. You're finishing something that never should have started. Mechanically, the fight is simple, but emotionally, it hits harder than many bosses that are far more complex. Sif isn't iconic because of difficulty. He's iconic because Dark Souls makes you pull the trigger and then forces you to live with it. That's why Sif earns the 5th spot. Knight Artorias. He is the legend you arrive too late to save. Every story about him paints the same picture. A noble knight, a hero of the abyss, the one who stood where others fell. And then you meet him, broken, corrupted, fighting with his offhand because his dominant arm is gone. This isn't a duel at his peak. It's a desperate clash with what's left. Artorias moves like a warrior who refuses to stop, even though his body already has. Every attack feels heavy, not just in damage, but in intent. You're not fighting a monster. You're fighting a failure that never gave up. That contrast is what makes him iconic. The myth versus the reality. The hero versus the aftermath. Artorias doesn't test your patience. He tests your respect. And that's why he takes the 4th spot. At place 3, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. This fight isn't epic. There's no build-up, no spectacle, no triumph. Just ash, and a man who has already lost. Gwyn isn't waiting for you as a god. He's clinging to the first flame, burned down to a shadow of what he once was. The music tells you everything before the fight does. Soft, broken, almost apologetic. There's no hatred in this battle, no rage, only inevitability. You don't defeat Gwyn. You relieve him. That's what makes this fight unforgettable. Not the mechanics, not the difficulty, but the realization that the world didn't end in fire. It ended in exhaustion. Gwyn isn't remembered because he's powerful. He's remembered because he's empty. And that silence is why he earns the 3rd spot. Number 2, Ornstein and Smough. This fight isn't iconic because it's fair. It's iconic because it breaks you. For the first time in Dark Souls, the game stops teaching and starts demanding. 2 bosses, 2 completely different rhythms, no mercy, no pause. Up to this point, Dark Souls tests your patience. Ornstein and Smough test your identity as a player. You don't just learn their moves, you learn how you react under pressure. Do you panic? Do you tunnel vision? Do you give up? The cathedral becomes a trial, not of skill, but of endurance. And then comes the cruel twist. You don't just win, you choose who lives and who becomes something worse. Phase 2 isn't a victory lap, it's a reminder. Even when you succeed, Dark Souls punishes hesitation. This fight doesn't care how good you are, it cares whether you adapt. That's why Ornstein and Smough aren't just a boss fight. They're the moment Dark Souls stops being a game and becomes a memory. And that's why they stand at number 2. At 1, Slave Knight Gael. Gael isn't iconic because he's the hardest boss. He's iconic because he's the end. Not just of Dark Souls 3, but of the entire trilogy. There are no gods here, no thrones, no chosen ones. Just 2 nobodies at the edge of a dead world. Gael doesn't guard something. He is the final consequence of the Age of Fire. A man who kept going long after meaning disappeared. Fighting not for power, but for a story that could finally end. The arena says everything. No walls, no escape, no audience. Only dust, lightning, and a sky that is already given up. Every phase strips something away. Hope, structure, illusion. Until all that's left is motion, instinct, and will. This fight isn't about learning patterns. It's about endurance. 2 warriors, equally exhausted, pushing forward because stopping means nothing. When Gael falls, there's no triumph, no relief, only silence. And that's why he's number 1. Because Dark Souls didn't end with a victory. It ended with a man who refused to stop, and another who finally did.
Is this the blood? The blood of the Dark Soul?
Dark Souls was never about winning. It was about persistence, loss, and the weight of going on. These fights didn't become iconic because they were hard. They became iconic because they meant something. They stayed with us, long after the bosses fell, long after the fire faded. And that's why we still talk about them.